Hi everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to rank all the books that I read in winter. Now winter for me is January, February, March, so this is also going to be my last video where I talk about the first quarter of the year. I had one video where I talked about my stats and goals and then one where I went over all the series that I'm currently in the middle of. And I will link those two down below if you're interested. But today I'm going to rank the 18 books that I've read in winter from least favorite to most favorite. Now, just to be clear, I actually read 19 books, but one of those was Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Basterica, and though I greatly enjoyed that book, I have an entire video dedicated to that one, which I will link down below. It's completely different than what I normally read, and I liked it for reasons that are also completely different than why I normally like a fantasy book. So that's why it's not in the ranking. Just know that I greatly enjoyed that one and that I would recommend it if the premise appeals to you. Now then, next up, why do I make this video? Well, basically I feel like most of us pick up books that we tend to enjoy. First of all, we pick up books that we heard about from reviewers that we trust, so that also means that we're skewed towards the better end of published books, in my opinion. And then we pick between those the ones that we think that we will enjoy. So that means that in most of my wrap-ups, most of my vlogs, I will say, I greatly enjoyed this book. But that might be confusing to you, but also to me, how these stand towards each other. And especially with some time going over some of these and having to be strict and making this ranking list, I actually saw that, especially the ones on the lower end, I didn't really enjoy as much as I thought at the moment. And that's also sort of reality check for me. Also, I don't have a rating system. I don't give stars. That's something that I am very strongly against, and I will probably make a video about that sooner or later. But that can also make it a little bit difficult for everybody who's watching how I feel about these books. So if you're interested in that, now you will know. And then the book that is lowest on this entire ranking list, I really didn't enjoy that one, and that is The Half-Drowned King by Linnea Hartsucker. Now, this is an historical fiction. It's the first one in a trilogy, and this is probably the only one from the entire list that I think is written very poorly. Now, of course, this is a personal opinion. I know that Liana from Liana's Library really enjoyed this entire trilogy. I just didn't. I think that the writing style was very simple. I think that the story was very simple. There was some political intrigue or an attempt to do that, but I thought it was way too simple and you could definitely see where this was going. This was also definitely, in my opinion, a very story-driven or plot-driven book, where I like character-driven books a little bit more. And then especially if the plot isn't that good. Also, the two characters that you are following, I didn't really feel a connection to them. I thought they were a little bit predictable at times, and they didn't really feel like real characters. So, all things combined, I just didn't like this book. It wasn't to my liking, and I think, even though this was in my unfinished series video, that I will actually DNF the entire series, because I need to get better at DNFing. It's on the bottom of the list. Why would I spend more time in this world? And then next up I have one that I am a little bit sad that it's that low on the list, but that is The Deep by Rivers Solomon. I don't have a physical copy because I listened to this one on audiobook, but yeah, I didn't really like it. Now, of course, this is a novella. It's only 160 pages. On audiobook it's 4 hours, so I listened to it on 2 times speed, I think, so 2 hours only. And I just don't like novellas in general. I feel like I need more time to have a connection with the story, with the characters, and that's just something that you don't have in novellas. And that's definitely a personal problem for me. It's just the type of book that I don't like. Apart from that, I also just think that the story wasn't really fitting for a novella. This is a story that talks about generational trauma. You follow mermaids who are actually the descendants of pregnant African slaves who were thrown overboard. And you have one person in this group of mermaids who needs to keep this history. They are called the historian. But this is very traumatic, and you follow that person who tries to escape this role because she can't deal with it anymore. So of course this is a very heavy topic, this is a very important topic, but because the story was so short, I didn't really feel connected to that character, almost to a degree that I felt guilty not being connected. I also think that there was a lot that was tried to do, but it just didn't really hit home for me. I see that a lot of people have the same complaint, that they wish it was longer, but they in general did enjoy it, while I just didn't. And I hope that I can find some more books like this, but then a little bit longer, so I have the time to feel a connection. And then I have a book that I'm actually very surprised that it was that low on the list. But when I thought about it, yeah, I actually didn't enjoy it as much as I said I did at the moment. And that is The Forgotten Beasts of Eld by Patricia M. McKillop. So this is a fairy tale. And I love fairy tale retellings. I think that in general, fairy tale retellings I really enjoy because I love the atmosphere and just the fantastical feeling that fairy tales bring with them. But fairy tale retellings add a lot more. They add more plot to it, they develop the characters a little bit better in my opinion, so you really feel more invested. While a fairy tale in itself often feels very simple, which is quite logical because it's usually a very short story, it's meant for children, it needs to have a very clear message, which is often very present in the back of the story. So all of that means that for me, I have a very hard time for fairy tales to connect to the characters. And I felt that this is what happened with this one. Now, of course, that's not a fault of the book. It's first of all a very short book. I think it's 230 pages, but it's a very big font, so I think that it's around the same time as The Deep. So again, short, and that's a problem for me. But then also the writing style was very like an original fairy tale, which this is. So I actually have another book by Patricia M. McKillop on my physical TBR, I think The Alphabet of Thorns, and I'm going to give that one a try, but if I don't like that one either, I think that that's just not the type of thing that I should pick up. I should pick up fairy tale and folklore retellings, but not the original ones, because they just feel a little bit flat for me. Then we have Red Rising by Pierce Brown. So this is the first in a trilogy, this is sci-fi. I picked this one up for my Expanding My Horizon series, where I want to try 5 sci-fi books. This was the first one, and I didn't really like it. I was pretty harsh. Well, no, I actually wasn't pretty harsh for this one. I have a vlog that I will again link down below, and I just had some issues, but I wanted to like it so much that I didn't really want to say the issues as harshly as I felt them. But basically, I didn't like the main character, Darrow. It's first person, and I'm pretty picky that when it's first person, it should be done right. He said some things that I don't think was fitting to his character and to his past. And then I thought that it was very, very similar to The Hunger Games. Now, I've actually never read The Hunger Games, I've just seen the movie, but I thought that this was basically the same thing. Now, to be fair, I have picked up Golden Sun since, and I think that is miles better. That might be a new all-time favorite. I'm almost at the end at this point, and if it stays as good as it was in the beginning and in the middle, then this will be a new all-time favorite, and that's a very big surprise for me. I think that the writing style is a lot better. I like Darrow as a character a lot more. I think that his own voice is much stronger in the second book than in this one, and I also think that the plot is much more original than in Red Rising. Now, I do think that Red Rising was his first book, so I do give him credit for that, and I can understand that that's maybe why it felt a little bit clunky. But yeah, Red Rising was not that good in my opinion. And then we have A Court of Roses by Sarah J. Maas, so ACOTAR. Now, this is one, I just wanted to pick it up for the romance. And I think that the romance here is very solid. I just think that the plot is a little bit predictable. It's also not that well built. I think that the world building is a little bit simple, which I don't usually mind. But then either your plot or your characters need to be very strong. And this all wasn't present in this book, this first book in the trilogy, I guess that it is. And then if I pick it up for romance, which was good here, but if everything else is bad, then you should give me just a lot of smut, which I then enjoy, but that also wasn't present here. So in general, I do enjoy this one. I think from this point on, I don't really have a big problem with the books. They just were fine, and I had some minor issues, which means that they are not at the top of the list, but from this point on, the books were enjoyable. However, I do think that I will like the second one probably better, because I have heard that the plot and the writing style do get a little bit more developed in the rest of the series. This one I thought was a little bit not enough, more on the surface than what I usually like. I usually like to delve a little bit deeper, and then to have a very enjoyable, not think too deeply read, there wasn't enough smut and romance. So it was a little bit those two folded issues that I had. In general, I do still want to continue with the series, and I am quite excited to see if it does really improve in quality and if I like it better. And then we have a fantasy standalone, The Story of Silence by Alex Myers. So this is a book, I think it's very important, I think it's very unique, and I would like more people to read this one. So here you follow a transgender character. They were actually born as a girl, but their father raised them as a boy so they can inherit. And in the first years of their lives, so this is the character that you follow, they don't even know that they are actually different than other boys. They don't know that they were actually biologically a girl. But when they know, this of course leads to a number of things happening to them. They are very confused, and you follow their journey of trying to find out who they are. This is also written by a transgender person, and I have seen that they have written more things but most of what he's written is actually non-fantasy, and I think that I could definitely sense that in this book. Because you have some talk about Merlin, for example, and all of that, which was in the premise of the book, made me think that it was going to be more fantastical. But even though you have Merlin, you have a dragon here and there, it's really on the background, and the fantasy in itself isn't that present. It's more this person's journey that you are following. And I think that that's done well. But what I would have liked more is, first of all, more fantasy, but you follow them until adulthood, where they figure out who they want to be and what they need to do that, and then the story stops. So maybe a sequel is coming. I would hope that, to see a little bit more of Silence's adult life and how they deal with everything that they figured out, because of course this is a medieval fantasy, so it's around the time of Arthur and his knights, and being a transgender character in this time period can't be easy, and until basically the end of the book, other people don't really know that, which is not a spoiler, that's just how the book is set up. But throughout the end, a lot of people do get to know this, and I would like to see how that takes place further along when they are actually an adult and maybe they want to have a romance or something like that. I would have liked to see more of that. But in general, this is a fine book. I think this is very unique, also in the tone. Even if you forget our main character, just because this is probably written by a person who doesn't usually write fantasy, this felt very unique in tone as well. Then we have Hall of Smoke by H.M. Long. This is actually a new release, and I've heard that a sequel is coming out next year, so I'm thinking that it's doing well, because the sequel has been announced after this first book came out, so I think that it was depending on how this book would do. And I think this was an enjoyable read. In this book you follow Hessa. This is definitely an epic fantasy where it is in a secondary world, but there's a lot of influence of Norse mythology, Vikings. You also have some Roman legionary type of people as well. So I did enjoy those historical influences. Hessa is a fighter, she's a warrior, she serves a warrior goddess, but in the beginning of the book, her whole tribe gets murdered, so including her husband, and she tries to find revenge, she tries to talk to her goddess for guidance, and a lot is happening also in the divine world. So you do have that mixing of the mortal people with divine people and what's happening there and the politics that happen there. So of course it's a short book, it's a standalone, it's not going to go into all of these things too deeply, but I did enjoy that. I always like it when gods are present in books, and this was present here as well. Now, what I do think was a little bit a negative for this book was the ending. I felt that the ending was very convoluted, it was very clunky, and it could have been executed better, in my opinion. What I also think is that Hessa as a main character doesn't really bring enough to the table to keep you invested throughout the entire series or throughout the entire book. Because of course she is grieving, and this is something that comes forward a couple of times, but that doesn't really make her the most interesting character ever. Of course, in a short, what this was a standalone, you don't expect multiple POVs and a very detailed story in general, but I feel like if we had just one other POV, you have one male character that you see throughout the book a couple of times, and if you just had a couple of chapters from his POV, I think that would have mixed things up and made it better. But in general, I do recommend this, especially if you like grim dark with a lot of influence of the gods, then this is one that you will probably enjoy, but I just had some minor issues with it. Then I have Luck in the Shadows by Lynn Llewellyn. This is the first book in a trilogy, the Night Runner trilogy, and that is the first trilogy in a longer series. And I'm reading this for a read along, the Scala along. This is the first one, as I said, and while I did enjoy it, I now read the second one, I think that one is better. Here you have an introduction of the world, an introduction of the characters, and an introduction of the politics. And what is definitely very strong here in this book, and I think now that I've read the second one in the entire series, is the characters. You have this interaction between Sergil and Alec that I really enjoyed, but to be honest, the overall plot I didn't really care for that much, especially in this book. I couldn't care less, and it was only at the end of the book that I was starting to think, okay, yeah, this is actually what happened, because I was so invested in these two characters, and the side characters as well, and their interaction with each other. I think what is a little bit a negative for this first book, but that does get solved in the second one, is that you almost have no female characters. The ones that you do see are very secondary, almost tertiary characters that you see a little bit, but not a lot. But that does get solved in the second one, although it wasn't here, so that's why it's a little bit lower on the list. In general, I do enjoy it, and I am quite excited to continue with the entire read-along. Then we have Circe by Madeline Miller. So again, this is a standalone and it's actually a retelling from Greek mythology where you follow Circe. So for this one I actually have a review, but I think that I don't like it as much as most people do. Most people absolutely love Circe. I had some issues with it. Well, what I do want to say is that I think this is beautifully written. I think that the quality, as objectively as you can say it, is very good. It's very whimsical. You have a lot of metaphors that are being used here. And I think if you want to have that, again, fairy tale-esque atmosphere, that's something that you can definitely find here. However, you follow Circe, and I think that this book is almost a character study of Circe, where you just follow her life. There isn't really a clear plot. There is definitely a message behind the book, but in general, I don't really... A message can improve my enjoyment of a book, but it's never going to be more important than the actual story or the actual connection that I feel to the characters. So if I do have that connection and then there's a hidden message, then of course my enjoyment is going to be increased. But if I don't have that first connection to plot or characters, and then there's a hidden message, that doesn't really hit me that hard as it should. So even though that was here, I didn't really feel connected to Circe. I also don't think that that was the meaning of the author to do that. It was just a character study of her, and then seeing how her life evolves and how the choices that she makes has an impact on her life. But it didn't really connect to me in any way, sense, or form. And then the story in itself felt like a bunch of short stories that were connected to each other, because Circe has a lot of encounters with mortals, but those encounters don't really have an impact on each other, so they are very separately throughout the story, which I enjoyed it most of all for the writing style, and that was something that I thought was really perfectly done almost, but I won't really pick it up. I won't think about Circe anymore, which is different for books that are higher on the list. Then next up I have City of Lies by Sam Hawke. This is the first book in the Poison War novels, which is a duology. You have Hollow Empire, this is on my TBR for this month, but I have heard from other people that the author actually wants to write more in this world, but it depends on how well these sell. So please pick up this duology for now, because it's really good. In City of Lies, you have a pretty unique premise, because you are following a proofer. And this is basically somebody who tries food and drinks for the Chancellor. And the Chancellor in this world is basically the king. Now, when this story begins, the current Chancellor and proofer are poisoned by a poison that was not detected by the proofer. So now we have a new Chancellor and we have a new proofer, and both of these are pretty new at their role, and they have a pretty big task at hand, because they need to find the poisoner and they need to try to not get killed by this unknown poison. Now, if that isn't enough, the city all of a sudden gets under siege. So you have all of this. They need to figure out if the siege is connected to the poisoner or if these are completely separate. They also don't understand why the siege is happening, why there is a rebellion. And yeah, I thought that that in general was very well done. I also think that the characters are very interesting to watch. You actually have two POVs. You have the POV of this proofer, but then you actually have also the POV of his sister, who was originally meant to be the proofer, because in this world, women are the ones who are heirs, which I also thought was very original and very interesting to read. But she was physically not strong enough, so she now tries to be more of a spy character. And it's also very interesting to see her role and how she needs to adapt from not being the proofer, which was something that she thought she was going to be for her entire life. So I really highly recommend this story. I think that this is amazing. The issues that I had with this is that the magic is minimal. And what I also felt was that this was a very static story, because of course they are under siege, so they can't really go anywhere. So that's a personal preference of mine. I like when parties are going to travel, when you see a lot of different locations, which of course wasn't the case here. But that's just personal preference. I think that being under siege and being in that city, that the author did handle it very well and did give a very good view and an illustrated view of this city. And you also go to different locations in the city. So in general, I do highly recommend this book. Then we have The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. I really enjoyed this one. I was going to try Joe Abercrombie anyway, and by now I finished the entire trilogy. I think that this is probably my least favorite book in the entire trilogy, but I think that it's still very good. In general, there's not really a plot. I know that a lot of people say, well, if you read the entire trilogy, there's definitely a plot, but it's minimal. It's very minimal. It's more about the characters, and again, a hidden meaning that you will find out if you read the entire trilogy. Now for me, again, as I said, the plot and the characters need to interest me for that hidden meaning to have any significance. But I think that the characters were very well done. I love Glocta, I love Logan, I love Giselle, most of all. And I think that in this first book you have a very good first impression of all of these characters, and the pawns are definitely set for the beginning of the second book. So I did enjoy this one, but because it was the weakest one in the entire trilogy, I am putting it, of course, a little bit back. There were some issues that I had with it, and reading the entire trilogy, I think that each of the books separately are probably going to have a higher rating for me than the trilogy as a whole. So that does leave a little bit of a bitter taste, even though, in general, I'm very glad that I picked up Joe Abercrombie, and I would highly recommend this trilogy. Just know that I think that you would be best if you read a little bit more fantasy, because this takes a lot of tropes and then put it on its head, and that's something that you can really appreciate if you know the tropes and know how they are usually used. So yeah, I like this one. It's a good, solid grimdark fantasy. I wouldn't say it's the best grimdark fantasy, which is something that I often hear. I haven't read that much grimdark, but it's not my favorite. Then next up I have Foxmask by Juliette Merlier. I don't really have a lot to say about this. In general, I like Juliette Merlier. She's the author of my favorite book, Daughter of the Forest, and she can't really do anything wrong. Everything that she writes I enjoy. I do think that the Saga of the Light Isles duology is not as good as the Seven Waters trilogy, and that in that duology, Foxmask is the weaker one of the two. Even though I greatly enjoyed it, I think that the beginning was pretty slow. There was a lot of repetition that if you read the first book, that shouldn't have been there. But then the ending was very good. So it's a little bit going back and forth. I also didn't like almost the love triangle that was present here. But Juliette Merlier, being the great author that she is, she did handle that very well, but there were just some minor issues that didn't really put it on the same level as anything else that I've read by her. And then we have Before They Are Hanged by Joe Abercrombie. So this is the second book in the First Law trilogy, and this is my favorite one of the trilogy. I think that this is very strong. You have a long quest, which, as I said, traveling characters is something that I will always enjoy, and you definitely had some character arc developments that I enjoyed seeing. I also think that Glocta's arc here was very interesting to follow. So yeah, a lot of things that I liked with this one, favorite one of the trilogy, and I hope that the other books in the First Law universe are as good as this one. Then we have Blood Upon the Sands by Bradley P. Bolio. This is the second book in the Song of the Shattered Sands series. So this is a longer series, I think 6 books in total. And I've only read the first 2. I really loved 12 Kings of Sharakai, which is the first book, but then this one is even better. So this is a desert set fantasy. You have a lot of political intrigue, you have a revenge plot, you have these gods that definitely play a role here, you have immortal kings. There's a lot going on, and that is also why I definitely need to pick up the third book soon, because I definitely will forget some things. You have a very strong friendship here as well, and I do recommend everybody to pick up this book if you like very epic fantasies with a lot of political intrigue as well, and a lot of different POVs, because that's definitely the case here. Even though you have one main character, Shada, you do see a lot of other characters and a lot of other plotting as well. And yeah, this is just a very good book. I need to pick up the third one, and I actually want to binge the entire series. Binge is a big word, but read the entire series by the end of the year. Then we have The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichek. This is a Norse mythology retelling, and it's often compared to Circe because we also have a female main character here. And as you can see, I like this one a lot more. I think the story is more present here, where, as I said, with Circe you have almost a lot of short stories that are knit together. This is definitely not the case here. You have a clear beginning, you have an ending, and you have a very big reveal at the end as well. Here I actually also felt invested in the side characters and in the children that this witch has, which I didn't really had in Circe. I cared a little bit about Circe, but I didn't really care a lot about the side characters, and it was more the atmosphere that was important. Here you also have that atmosphere, but I think plot is more present, that I think that the characters are stronger, and I also think that in general Norse mythology is just something that I enjoy a lot more as well. But if you want to pick up something like that, then I do think that The Witch's Heart is a very good book to try. So now we're getting in our top 3, and these 3 books are all amazing. I don't really have any bad things to say about them, and yeah, I really enjoyed them. The first one is Raise the Sands by Sarah Beth Durst. So this is an adult fantasy standalone, also with a desert setting, and I'm actually going to do a spoiler-free review for this one that is probably going to come up on Saturday or Sunday of this week, because I think that a lot of more people need to pick this one up. Sarah Beth Durst is known for her Queens of Rentia trilogy, and I do think that there's a new standalone, The Bone Maker, that has recently been published that I will definitely pick up soon as well. But I don't hear a lot of people talk about Trace's Sands. I think that this is a very unique book, not so much in the story, even though I think that the plot was very well handled and it really kept me gripped until the end of the book, but also in terms of the characters. Because here you follow a mother who is trying to protect her daughter. And this is something that you don't really see a lot of in fantasy. In most fantasies, the people that you follow are the daughters. They are the young people who try to save the world. And this is a little bit more realistic maybe, with a character who has been through some stuff and now tries to protect her daughter. So yeah, I would highly recommend this one. If you're looking for fantasy standalones, I know that that can be very difficult, then please give this one a try. And then we have The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I love this book and I want to read The Dragon Republic pretty soon. And then I have heard that not everybody loves the ending of The Burning God, which is the conclusion of the trilogy, and I'm quite allergic for dissatisfying endings, and then it can really leave a bitter taste in my mouth for the entire trilogy. So I'm a little bit nervous for that, but for now, The Poppy War, I really enjoyed it. And I think maybe for a reread I might enjoy it less, because a lot of the things that I was hoping was going to happen throughout the book didn't, and then we do have some heartbreaking moments, but I think that that improves the quality of the book. A lot of things are at stake and you can definitely see that it's realistic and that a lot of things can happen even to our main characters, which I enjoyed. A lot of people think that Rin is an annoying main character, and I think that some people might not like her arc because it gets dark pretty quickly, but I actually enjoyed that. I loved the school-like setting, I loved everything after that, I loved that she was an underdog but that she rises pretty quickly. All of that was all to my taste, so I hope that I will love the entire trilogy as well. And then my favorite book of the first quarter of the year, I don't think that anybody is surprised, is Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. So this is the conclusion of the Life Ship Traders trilogy. I didn't like Ship of Magic, which was the first book, and I thought I'm going to be that odd person out who loves the Farseer trilogy and that doesn't love the Life Ship Traders trilogy. But the second book, and then especially this third one, was amazing. I know that a lot of people like the second book more than the third one, but I liked the third one more. I liked the conclusion. I liked a lot of dark things that were happening here. Liked is maybe not the exact wording that I should use, but I think that it was well implemented in the story. And at the end, yeah, I don't really have a lot of bad things to say here. Again, I have seen some people say that the beginning felt a little bit slow, but I never really mind that. I liked all of the story arcs and all of the characters, and I wanted to follow all of them. So I didn't have a problem with some slower parts. In general, Robin Hobb, I think that she is currently probably my favorite author, and I'm only halfway through The Realm of the Elderlings, so it can only improve from here. So that was my ranking of all of the 18 books that I read in winter. Please let me know if you've read any of these and if you were as in love or as disappointed with them as I was. And also let me know what your favorite book in winter was, because then I might want to pick it up as well. As always, I hope that you've enjoyed the video and see you next time. Bye!